My friends, this in advance. I can't possibly condense all the most important bits in the first half, so please stick with me to the end. We're going to be talking about a lot of things today. I'm going to be sharing some unique footage, perspective, observations on all things World War III. I guarantee you're not going to hear half of this stuff anywhere else, okay? Now, what you are seeing behind me is a compilation of footage by the Sun News Agency, I won't get into why I use air quotes there, of Russia's first ever nationwide nuclear war simulation drill. This is the first time this has happened. This is unprecedented. Remember when I said that we're living in unprecedented times and that the word unprecedented is getting boring? Well, just wait. You ain't seen nothing yet. This full-scale nuclear war simulation drill that happened across Russia as the alarm sirens rang out from Moscow to St. Petersburg was done on the same day as the emergency alert system test in the United States, the most pervasive one of those to date, I should add. Now, what the media doesn't want you to fixate on is that those two things happened on the same day in the current geopolitical climate. What they want you to focus on is a very, very minuscule fringe voice on the internet, the usual suspects, the usual nutjob, cacamamie, charlatan purveyors of conspiracy theory crap that were saying that this was going to turn everybody, that this emergency alert test was going to turn everybody into zombies via nanobot, medical intervention technology that everybody received over the last 3 years. In spite of the fact that for the last 4 days, I've been trying to distance myself from this view and tell people, no, that's not going to happen. It's complete bullshit that the media is just amplifying because they want to cover up the severity of the current state of global tension. It didn't matter, because I got 1,000 comments saying, see, it wasn't Y2K after all. You guys are so stupid. No, you took the bait. As usual, the media wins again. Now, anytime anybody questions anything about civil defense anomalies happening in the current geopolitical climate they're happening in, will just be relegated to, oh, so you're one of those people who believe X, right? So that's what they want people to talk about. And you wouldn't have heard about any of those fringe theories were it not for Rolling Stone and NBC and ABC talking about, ha, here come the tinfoil hatters once again. I've been saying for the last week, that's bullshit, disregard it completely. That's exactly what they want. There's nothing more they love than those 5G nuttery theories, right? So just please don't succumb to that. This is the real deal. Russia is preparing for full-scale nuclear war, and our media is making a joke about it. That's the shit we're in right now. Our media, who lies about every possible other thing under the sun time and time again, year after year after year, and we're supposed to just by default believe what they say, and most people do, because it's just complacency, it's conformity. You see it enough places and people believe it. Anyways, before I dissect this footage and I talk about whether or not I think the Russians were serious, which I do, we're going to just break down the bullet talking points for the day, okay? We have Poland, for the first time ever, setting up Patriot missile defense systems in the city of Warsaw. Why would Poland be setting up Patriot missile batteries in the city? Think about it. Nuclear war drills across Russia that we're going to cover in just a minute. Russia successfully testing a nuclear missile, not just any nuclear missile delivery system, but a nuclear-powered nuclear missile delivery system. Some people are saying this violates the non-ratified nuclear test ban treaty that the United States has yet to ratify. Not that it matters, because Putin just said today that they're probably going to pull out of that and they're ready to start doing nuclear testing once again. Putin also made some interesting statements in a conference that he attended recently, just today, in fact, a day after all of this emergency alert stuff took place, which is not a surprise. This is the most vocal Putin has ever been about the prospect for using nuclear weapons. He said that NATO stands no chance of survival with a retaliatory strike. That means if NATO strikes first, really what he's saying is in a nuclear war, because the Russians aren't just going to sit idly by and let NATO strike them first with a nuclear weapon. This could be projection. They could be the ones that are going to launch first. Regardless, this is the most vocal I've ever seen Putin be. Usually he kind of speaks in a roundabout sort of way. He's not to the point. He was very to the point with what he said today, in that NATO stands no chance of survival with a nuclear strike. And it was all about nukes, what he was talking about today. And of course, terminating the ratification of the test ban. The Russians ratified it, the Americans haven't. So the Russians are saying, you know what, we're going to pull our ratification and we are not going to honor the nuclear test ban treaty anymore. We're going to start testing nuclear weapons. That's essentially what they said. We need to talk about the numbers of casualties on the front line and what they mean for World War III escalation. I'm going to show you a very informative infographic in just a moment. We are going to talk about the mass production of Sarmat ICBMs. That's another thing that Putin talked about. There are about 4 or 5 relevant points for nuclear Armageddon that Putin talked about in his most recent interview. We need to talk about Russia preparing for a massive offensive in the eastern direction. We have Gregory Weaver, a former high-ranking Pentagon official. This is on NATO's website now, saying that NATO must prepare for nuclear Armageddon. We're going to break down the reasons that he provides. We also have some situation developing with Ukrainian war support. And I'm going to give you my prediction. I know a lot of you guys love good old speculation on the Canadian Prepper channel, but I'm going to tell you why that an attack on nothing that happens in Ukraine anymore is going to be enough to generate more interest in this conflict. I'm going to show you all the graphs and figures that support exactly what I'm saying. What they need is an attack on NATO. Okay, they need something of Nord Stream equivalent, but in a NATO country, but that is clearly can be pinned on the Russians. We have to talk about inflation and what's ado with that. Countries continuing to buy more gold. The U.S. shooting a Turkish drone. Turkey taking control of the NATO forces in Kosovo, which is just weird to have both of those things happen on the same day. And we need to talk about a poll which goes over people's thoughts about the end of the world. Very, very interesting, and break down the map in a lot of cool infographics and all that stuff, okay? And man, all I can say, my friends, is that we've been grinding like you wouldn't believe. I'm down one communist cameraman for a month because he went to India. He's doing the 7 years in Tibet thing. I don't know what he's doing, but they had a hard time getting there because now visas have been suspended, or the process of applying for a visa to go to India has been basically suspended. They're expelling Canadian diplomats. So a whole new dynamic is emerging between BRICS versus NATO, and we're doing our part to act as a catalyst for that. So let's talk about this footage. Now, what you're seeing here is what looks like, I can tell you right from looking at this, right from the get-go, that some of this footage, whatever these guys are doing, you can tell that they don't have a whole lot of experience wearing hazmat suits. They just don't wear it like they own it. And I'm not saying that this is something that you master, but you can just tell that this looks like it was put together. Nonetheless, it's a lot more than what we're doing here. And understand, if they do try to do something like this here, they'll make sure that they echo some other nut job theory before it happens, so that if you criticize it at all, you'll just be lumped into that same basket of nuttery, okay? So what are they doing here? They're putting out signs saying probably contaminated area, emergency services putting out fires, CBRN style exercise going on here, cordoning off an area, it looks like, doing some sort of casualty response in hazmat suits. Now, realistically, you got dogs without gas masks, so I mean, these dogs are likely expendable. And, you know, obviously they're not going to die immediately from radiation sickness. Maybe that's the idea. If you use dogs, they're just going to be inevitable casualties. But what was I going to say? So it looks like they're simulating some sort of a strike on critical infrastructure here. This doesn't look like this is all nuclear war related. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that drone going into that critical infrastructure. Interestingly, though, they are showing what is obviously meant to be a doomsday bunker here. You don't get these kind of blast doors in your run-of-the-mill bunker that you're just trying to hide from conventional ordnance. This is something that you use for nuclear Armageddon, okay? So they're clearly showing off here that they are preparing for full-scale nuclear war. Now, this footage here that you're seeing, this is taking place in a school in Russia. And I just got a message on my phone here. I just want to see what this is. B-1 bomber is up. Okay, well, yeah, B-1 bombers are always up nowadays. So, you know, it's almost as if they're doing so much military activity now, you just never know when it's going to happen. And that's kind of what you would expect. There are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. There's some really clever cat out there that is putting my phrases on T-shirts and selling them on Redbubble. Anyways, let's get back to this. Okay, so these gas masks that they're wearing, these are the kind of gas masks that you use if you want to die. Okay, these are the old school World War I, World War II style gas masks that you just used so that you could finish the job. There's not a tight seal around these ladies' heads. These are all females, or most of them anyways. They'd have to cut that hair off if they wanted something like this to work, because it doesn't seal around the face. It seals over the head. So these things nowadays, I think they're just used as costumes for Halloween, time of the year, I guess. But in terms of practical purposes, no, you don't want to be relying on a gas mask like this. The Israeli gas masks are similar to this in their look. The old school ones, they do seal around the face. They'll probably do just fine. But if you want the real meal deal, the full meal deal, the gas mask that's actually going to offer full protection, there's a variety of those, of course, on CanadianPreparedness.com, from Mira Safety to Mestel Safety to 3M. There's a lot of very credible companies out there. But I guess this could be used as an effective training tool to teach about the principles of alpha and beta radiation contamination. Videos we've done, countless times before where we've spoken about those topics. So, I don't know if this happened at every school across Russia. It's a lot more that we're doing here. And I mean, it's just concerning that this is happening at all. Around the same time that sirens are blaring out across the country, the same time that Putin is more vocal about nuclear weapons than he's ever been, at a time when they are starting to ratchet up their production of Sarmat ICBMs, which was another piece of news that we need to talk about today. And on the same day, they did the first ever test of their nuclear-powered Skyfall missile system, a nuclear-powered cruise missile that can travel around for up to 14 days. So if you don't think things are getting serious, and there's going to be all sorts of people that are saying things like, oh, nothing has happened yet, ha ha ha, see, nothing has happened yet. Those people will say that until the bitter end, okay? This is what you're going to get. You're going to get somebody talking to you. This is one of the FEMA spokespeople here. They're just going to give it to you dry. They're not going to tell you what any of this is about. They got to do their due diligence. They're checking a box. They don't actually care about the American people, the North American people, because they don't share that affinity with their population that they might in other countries where they actually have a contingency plan for the better part of their population. They don't have that here. They don't care about it. You're on your own, as you should be anyways. Never rely on the government to do these things for you. Now let's just take a look at the map here, okay? This is what we got going on the map. Boy, is there a lot going on. Okay, where should we begin? Putin announced an imminent mass production of the Sarmat ICBM, the commencement of serial production for Russia's latest super heavy intercontinental ballistic missile. This has a greater range. It can carry up to 10 warheads plus 40 decoy vehicles. So, I mean, there's no possible way of, even if, I would say, intercepting one ICBM traveling at 20,000 kilometers an hour is virtually impossible. It's like hitting like something going twice as fast as a bullet. It's not going to happen. More than twice as fast as a bullet. It's impossible. And, you know, to try to neutralize 50 of them from one missile, never mind a volley of 100 of these coming at you at once, that's thousands of targets that you have to, it's never going to happen. So Putin is right when he says that even if you strike us first, you won't survive the counterstrike. He's right. Now, another thing that he said in the plenary session of the Valdai International Discussion Club, he said that they're considering allowing the resumption of nuclear weapons tests in Russia. So they're going to start testing nukes again. We showed you last week different places in Nevada, in China, and in Russia. This was a story by, it wasn't the New York Times, but it was one of those very popular mainstream media agencies that showed satellite imagery that suggests that they're starting to reboot their nuclear testing facilities all around the world. So that's a point of concern. Nothing to see there. Let's just laugh at the people who think about 5G nanotech zombies, right? So Russia may withdraw ratification of the nuclear test ban treaty. Russia successfully tests, so they claim, the Burovzhnik intercontinental missile, the Skyfall missile, and we broke that down the other day. We have NATO publishing an article on preparing for a full-scale nuclear war with Russia. All of this happening in the same week as this emergency alert stuff that you're not supposed to think twice about. Because remember, it's just checking a box. And they're going to come later and they're going to say, oh, you didn't read the fine print, right? Just like with, you know, things that have been happening for the last 3 years that, you know, were such a great importance at the time. Now it's like, oh, no, we meant this, right? That's what they're trying to do. They're just checking a box. They want to do it without inciting a panic because they know that the specter for nuclear war is higher than it's ever been. NATO publishes an article on preparing for a full-scale conflict with Russia. Now, this is very interesting. Check this out, okay? So, former high-ranking Pentagon officer Gregory Weaver is now saying that NATO must prepare for nuclear war. And he gives some very interesting insights, things that yours truly was saying only a year ago, namely along the normalization of utilizing tactical nuclear weapons and why it won't necessarily escalate to the strategic full-scale World War III level just because somebody uses a nuke. Now check this out. He gives a few reasons as to why we need to prepare for nuclear war. Because Russia is willing to take risks, as proven with the Ukraine situation. Russia took the risk. They didn't know if NATO was going to intervene right away. They didn't know to what extent NATO was going to intervene. And now that it appears as though they're winning, although I'm not 100% convinced of that, it appears as though they definitely have a superiority in terms of firepower and possibly are on the brink of doing another major offensive. Maybe they're just going to continue forward. Maybe China is looking at what's happening in Ukraine and saying, you know what? Clearly, the U.S. and its allies are going to abandon Ukraine, even though I'm not convinced on that at all. I'm not saying that, but this is the thinking of this paper, that maybe China is looking at this situation, and if the Americans and the EU does turn its back on, I'm just keep getting the messages here. I got to start doing these live. Okay, anyways, we'll check that out later. I might have to do a follow-up video. Something's going on right now. Okay, so let me just go over this. Russia is willing to take risks. That's reason number one. So are they going to risk going into the Baltics or Poland? Is that why Warsaw is setting up Patriot missile defense system? Because they know they're next. It's possible. Russia's nuclear coercion and blackmail. So using the threat of using nuclear weapons if anybody else gets involved. Now we know NATO has Article 5. The Baltics are, in theory anyways, protected by the NATO alliance. So that shouldn't happen in those places, but you just never know. Maybe Russia is testing us here. Okay? Russia will likely increase its reliance on nuclear weapons due to the performance of its conventional forces in Ukraine. Now, this one is a subject of debate. Of course, we're relying on the numbers being spit out by the Pentagon in Ukraine as they pertains to Russia's attritional rate. We're going to show you this amazing graphic, and anybody who does these sorts of graphics, we're going to show you in a minute. I give props to them. It doesn't matter if it's maybe politically biased in one way or the other, but they're just amazing, and we're going to try to break it down and dissect it and show you that in no way, shape, or form is Ukraine on the brink of collapsing like a lot of the Russia bros would be claiming for the last 18 months. Also, they claim that Russia will attack NATO. Now, here's what he says. This is the only part I'm going to read. Everything else is going to be my own unique observations to share with you. That's why you come here. You don't come here for the news. To meet these requirements, NATO needs a range of continuously forward deployed, survivable, theater nuclear capabilities, theater meaning tactical, that can reliably penetrate adversary theater air and missile defense systems with a range of explosive yields on operationally relevant timelines. Guys, they're preparing for a tactical nuclear war. I said it first. I said that normalization of tactical nuclear weapons, we will see it in our lifetime. Starship Troopers type stuff. You know, like Davy Crockett style bazooka launch nuclear weapons are coming. Instead of fearing nuclear war, Weaver argues that the West should embrace it. NATO, this is on a NATO website, okay? NATO should equip its fighter jets and submarines with tactical nuclear weapons to deter a tactical Russian strike. Remember, they're sending F-35s to Suffield. Is it Suffield base in UK? And they're going to be armed with nuclear weapons. And convince Russian leadership that NATO is fully prepared to counter limited nuclear first use with its military effective nuclear responses of our own. So there you have it, a high-ranking Pentagon official, an ex-official, still published by the NATO website, is calling for a ramping up of nuclear war. Okay? This is from NBC. Russia tests its own nationwide defense alert in preparation for nuclear war with the U.S. Russia conducted its first nationwide civil defense exercise as President Vladimir Putin scares his people into thinking the West will start a nuclear war. Interesting. Think about that for a second. This is our lamestream media telling you that Putin is trying to scare his population into thinking that the West will start a nuclear war with Moscow. What purpose would that serve for Putin to scare his people to think that the West would start a nuclear war? It wouldn't serve any function whatsoever towards the end of trying to win in Ukraine. Otherwise, people would say, hey, we need to get out of this Ukrainian situation. No. This is all projection. Because they know that if we were to do the same exercises here, people would be banging on the White House door saying, you got to stop this war. It's just reversed. I mean, yeah, this is kid stuff. This is getting boring trying to dissect this stuff. It's too easy. This is elementary propaganda. Russia's retaliatory nuclear strike to leave the enemy without no chance of survival. That's from Vladimir Putin. Guys, the nuclear threats are on a whole new level right now. A whole new level. You would have never heard Putin say something like this a year ago. You would have never had them testing a nuclear-powered missile a year ago, or doing these nuclear drills a year ago, or putting nuclear weapons in Belarus. I mean, this is all new. New. And they want you to think it's a joke. That's what they want you to think. Now, look at this. Isn't this a contrast of opinions? This is one story on the left from Russian media. This is a story on the right from Ukrainian media. Who are you going to believe? According to Medvedev, the West is pushing through the negotiation process in order to gain a break and weaken Russia. Really? What does Zelensky say? Zelensky warns a pause in fighting will help Kremlin restore its military potential. They're both saying that a pause in the war is going to be exploited by the other side to bolster its forces. Who's telling the truth? Who's lying? Excuse me again, I'm losing my voice. Shouting in here. This was a very interesting graphic. You've probably seen things like this before. And basically what it is, it's showing you how the war progresses and the numbers. Okay, I'm not sure if you can see it all there. It's not the greatest resolution. But you can see when the Russians started. Now, I'm trying to figure out which political bias created such a map, but it actually appears to be fairly objective. And I'll tell you why. Because it's showing that the Russians, like if you wanted to believe that this was a pro-Russian engineered creation, then at the beginning it shows that the Russians only had about 250,000 troops to invade Ukraine with. Now, typically the 3-to-1 ratio rule applies in that when you're invading, your invading force should be 3 times that of the defending force, because typically the casualty rate on the invading side is 3 times higher, because defending is easier than offending. You suffer more casualties. But of course, the stakes are greater. The spoils of war are higher for the invaders if they win. So at the beginning, they do paint this reality that Russia was indeed undermanned. But where it maybe gets a little pro-NATO towards the end is in some of the numbers. And remember this map for anybody who says that the Ukrainian military is on its way out. Just remember this map, because Ukraine still has an incredible amount of manpower. So as you see, as we move here, this is the beginning of the war. Russia immediately takes over 25% of the territory. And then Ukraine starts fighting back. They start sending in more weapons, and you can see the tallies of the weapons going up. They're going up, they're going down. And towards the end, we're just going to skip ahead here. Ukraine obviously fights back. Now, towards the end, we're seeing some very, very high numbers. Ukraine mobilized nearly 1 million guys, okay? Russia mobilized up to 740,000 guys. Now, where this map is misleading is that what it's showing here, it's showing the totality of Ukraine's military, whereas it's only showing what Russia has committed from its entire military to this specific fight. Russia has a much larger military than 770,000 people. They have a massive border to police. So only a fraction of their military is actually here fighting in this conflict. We don't really know what Russia has left outside of this, but we can presume it's a lot of stuff, okay? For starters, they only have 4,000 tanks here. Russia easily still has over 10,000 tanks. Some of them might be much older Soviet-era tanks, but in this war, we're letting that old school is actually better because it doesn't require the maintenance. You don't need the special tools to repair all these vehicles. So as time goes on here, you're going to notice that this gap is starting to narrow. And this is why Ukraine is shitting bricks right now, because Russia is closing the gap. Now let's move forward here. So now we're at, what date are we at here? We are at August 24th, okay? Now the gap is 878,000 troops from Russia to Ukraine's 940,000. Let's just back it up a sec. What was it before? Back in June, it was 800,000 to 950,000. What was it before that? Okay, so we see this gap was around 210,000 at its maximum. And now we're starting to see this gap close. Towards the end here, when the gap is nearly closed, 900,000 to Ukraine's 950,000. Russia has about 4 to 5 times the amount of tanks committed just to this fight, meaning they probably have 10 times the amount of tanks still. They have 17,000 armored vehicles. Okay, you can't actually see this on the screen here, so that's not good. But it shows their specs there. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that it appears as though Russia is amassing a force that is going to be sizable enough to do a major clean sweep offensive. Now, people who are saying that the Ukrainian military is on the brink of collapse, their numbers of tanks, albeit dwindling, they still have 1,000 tanks. They still have 5,400 armored vehicles. 63 fighter jets, 77 helicopters, 152 launchers, including all those HIMARS that they have, even though the Russians have about 10 times the amount of artillery. So we're really at a situation here where if Ukraine doesn't do something fast, if they don't get the help that they need fast, it's very likely that Russia is going to take over a good chunk of that country very soon. Now, on that topic, and on the topic of a looming government shutdown, I want people to think about something. When I told you some of the best stuff is in the latter half of this video, this is it. Zelensky says that there was a deadly Kharkov village missile attack and it was no blind strike. So today, I think something like 50 people died in an attack on a civilian area. And of course, this is being blamed on the Russians. And for all we know, it probably was. But just remember that that errant Ukrainian missile that hit the busy market, New York Times came out a month later and said, oh, it looks like that was probably Ukrainians. But at the time, everybody was saying it was the Russians. Every single mainstream news source was saying it was the Russians. Take a look at this. This is media coverage of the war, okay? That was at its peak. This is Google searches. This is mentions in mainstream media. So as you can see up here, lots of mentions at the start of the war. It kind of falls off. And then it goes up again because there was some nuclear stuff going on, then the Prigozhin stuff, and then it's kind of just, leveled off. They're still covering it, but not nearly in as great of amount as it was earlier in the conflict. So, and that's very evident in Google searches. Almost nobody is searching about the Ukraine war anymore. So here's the problem, because what they're trying to do with this is they're trying to capitalize on it. It's called disaster capitalism, baby. They're trying to get support from Europe by, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't do this or that this wasn't a tragic event, or not trying to minimize it at all, but this type of event simply is not eliciting the concern as it might have at one point, like back in the Bucha days with that whole situation. That was something that garnered a lot of support for Ukraine. Even something on that level won't do it anymore. No. What they need right now, the only thing that is going to save Ukraine in terms of support for this conflict right now, and remember, you heard it here first, the only thing is going to be an attack on NATO. There's going to be an attack on NATO soon, I believe. I think that that is the only way they can lock in support and funding for this conflict if the people who are supporting and funding it get a little taste of what it's all about, to put the scare into people, because the Russophobia is wearing off. Okay, people are starting to call on the bullshit. Obviously, the Republicans as well, a lot of them are starting to say, this ain't going to happen. If Trump does become the House Speaker, then all bets are off for Ukraine aid. But then I guess we're really going to see how deep the tentacles of the deep state pervade. So I do think that that's what's needed at this point in time. If they don't get that, and I'm not talking about a Nord Stream, because that was a strategic attack on critical infrastructure to try to economically negatively impact the Russians. I'm talking about they need an attack on NATO countries that they can somehow say was the Russians or due to the Russians or some group which was adjacent to Russians. That's the only way you're going to gin up more support for this conflict in Ukraine at this point in time, because nobody cares anymore. That's just the brutal reality of it. I mean, there's wars flaring up all over the place. You got the Kosovo thing now. And maybe even that might supplant Ukraine because it's new, right? And this is just how fickle we are as a nation that, and when people crack jokes when our politicians misspeak and they say things like, well, this is the cheapest way to fight the Russians, they're not lying, because they know they couldn't handle the PR disaster that would be Americans, Canadians, NATO countries, servicemen coming home in body bags. So that's what they mean when they say cheap. Okay? I'm not saying that that statement that devalues Ukrainian life and just exploits it to fight wars that they are claiming are on our behalf. And there's two sides to this argument. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. There's two sides. Putin has a side, Russia has a side, we have a side. Evil is everywhere. There are bad, authoritarian, power-hungry despots everywhere. And as many of you can appreciate, our society is no different. I'm just saying there's two sides to every story. So to all of these people who are, proud, you're proud American, you're a proud Canadian, I totally get it. But we understand, I look at who's in charge, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Biden. I mean, we understand that our leaders are deceptive. We understand how beguiling this entire system is. So there's a distinct possibility, and I know this, I know a lot of you know this, that we are antagonizing this thing, that we instigated this thing in some way, shape, or form through NATO expansion. But oh yeah, NATO expansion shouldn't bother Russia, right? Well, according to Vladimir Putin, he says that he wanted into NATO, but they denied him that. Could it have something to do with natural gas? I don't know. Shit's going down in the Black Sea. I was amazed yesterday when I was having a little exchange with another Twitter account that I follow, that they had completely forgotten that the Royal Air Force is in the Black Sea, policing the Ukrainian grain corridor with their fighter jets. Right now, they're in the Black Sea, policing the Black Sea with fighter jets, okay?